Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Lunch and Learn on exercise and nutrition for a healthy mind. We appreciate you joining us for this presentation. This is our third quarterly Lunch and Learn for this Core Health program, the 2022 Core Health program. We respect your time, and we want to provide you with valuable content. And this content will take us about 15 or so minutes to go through. Please be aware that at the end of the presentation, there is a code word that we will give that you can use on the Microsoft Forms link on the manageable activity in order to get your 30 points for attending today's Lunch and Learn. We hope that it's valuable to you. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a fantastic worksite wellness team that's here for you to help with the worksite wellness and help with the healthy employees. That team includes myself, and I'll be giving today's presentation. My name is Andrew Baker. I am one of the worksite wellness coordinators. I do help in the Blessing area in Quincy, also in Keokuk, and with some companies in the Iowa area. We have Leanne Main, who is the main worksite wellness coordinator over the wellness program for Blessing Health System. We have Jamie Cannell, who's the worksite wellness coordinator that mainly operates in the Hannibal location and with some Missouri companies. We have Henry Houghton, who's our wellness coach here with Blessing Health System, and many of you have likely had him if you've done a screening already for an in-person screening. And then Emily Wright is our wellness coach in the Pittsfield area at Illini. So today what we want to talk about is this idea around exercise and nutrition helping us with a healthy mind. So we're going to talk about what is a healthy mind, or what could be considered a definition of a healthy mind. We'll talk about exercise and the brain, and how exercise can benefit the brain. Then we'll talk about nutrition and what it can do for the brain and how the things that we eat affect how we feel and our brains. We'll kind of review those concepts, talk about making a change, what that could look like in your life, and then we will share that code word so that you will get your points. We want to start off with this quote, and this quote is from Hippocrates, who is known as the father of modern medicine. Seems like a pretty smart guy, and he has this quote, which I think is perfect for what we're talking about today, and it says, "If you are in a bad mood, go for a walk. You are still in a bad mood, go for another walk." And I think it's a little humorous talking about how if you have one to go on another, but I think it's so applicable. And I've seen this power in my own life. My wife and I have small children at home, and I know that if they've had a bad day, we just had a more stressful day than not, which happens sometimes. We've gone on a walk, and both of us, if we go on a walk and then we come back, it's just amazing what it can do for you, for how you feel. It seems like you come back and things just feel a little bit different, and I think it's uplifting. So a smart quote from Hippocrates here. So let's move on and talk about what is a healthy mind. You have this big definition from the American Psychological Association that I want to share with you, and it says that mental health is a state of mind characterized by emotional well-being, good behavior adjustment, relative freedom from anxiety and disabling symptoms, and a capacity to establish constructive relationships and cope with the ordinary demands and stresses of life. Now, that is a big definition, and it says a lot. I think it's just useful conceptually to kind of wrap our minds around what we're talking about, and I want to share what this definition says and doesn't say. First of all, it doesn't say exactly what's going on with your mind, but some of these concepts can be useful to look at. It says that you have good behavior adjustment. It doesn't say that you have perfect behavior adjustment. It's okay that we don't always have the best response. It just says that generally we have good behavior adjustment to what's going on, that we have relative freedom from anxiety and disabling symptoms. That doesn't mean that we never experience anxiety. I certainly had anxiety before starting this presentation. Many of us experience anxiety daily, some of the things that we do, but it's that most of the time we have relative freedom from those things and that we're not trapped by those things. And also that we have an ability to cope with it. It says that we have the ability to cope with the ordinary demands and stresses of life. It doesn't mean that we don't experience those stressors. It doesn't mean that we always cope in the best way. It just means that we have coping strategies that we can use to help with that. And we hope that today, using some exercise and nutrition principles, can provide you more tools that could help you cope with some of those demands and stresses of life. So exercise and food are powerful. This is the big idea here. We have this brain lifting up a huge weight over his head, how the food affects the brain. And we know that both of these things play a role. You've probably seen this in your own life, how you feel after exercising, if you do that, how you feel after different kinds of meals and foods, and how it can affect exactly how you think and how you feel. So we know that those two things are powerful. So let's talk about what they do. So the exercise benefits on the brain. So we'll talk a few of those benefits. One of those is that it increases levels of endorphins. Now, endorphins are those pain-killing hormones that help you feel better. You've probably heard of the quote-unquote runner's high, and that's because of release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. And this can definitely help you feel better, and one of those benefits of exercise. Exercise also helps improve sleep, and studies show that a healthy exercise routine can help improve both the quality and the duration of the sleep that you get. Exercise can also be a healthy distraction and is stress relieving. I think this harkens back to that quote from Hippocrates that sometimes it's just the getting away. Sometimes the things that you experience while exercising that is stress relieving, and we can do that in a healthy way. It also can increase serotonin and brain-derived neurotropic factor, or BDNF. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that you might have heard of, and this helps regulate our mood and how we feel. BDNF is maybe a new one for you, and this has to do with learning and memory and higher functions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that since it may not be something that you've heard a lot of. And then exercise can and may even reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety if you're feeling those. So brain-derived neurotropic factor. So BDNF is a growth factor that is vital to the regulation of neural processes and neurogenesis, which I think is kind of a fancy way of saying it helps grow new neurons and helps with brain growth. And why is this relevant? Well, high levels of BDNF is associated with those enhanced spatial verbal memory and recognition capabilities. The big takeaway here is that it can counteract the effects of the chronic stress that we experience, and many of us have experienced over the last couple of years and experienced in healthcare, and then cognitive decline, which is all too much of a common problem. And we know how damaging that can be, especially in the elderly, and we know that low levels of BDNF, which are found more in the elderly, may lead to compromised memory, neurodegeneration, and various other cognitive impairments. So if we can do some things that help raise levels of BDNF, not only can help us with how we learn, but might combat stress and help us even as we age. So what kind of exercise is best? And usually that's the question when it comes up with this. Okay, we know it does these cool things, so what can we do to help improve our brain or minds through exercise? And the bottom line up front, you see that in the red text, is that it all can help. Exercise helps, period. Whether you like to walk, like we talked about earlier, we'd like to be on this treadmill, struggling like our guy in our image, or you'd like to lift weights, all of those things can help and they all have benefits. So no matter what, I hope you take that away, that it matters. If you want to know how can I best produce specifically BDNF and raise serotonin in some ways, and that has been shown by studies that moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise help improve those the best. So it's important to ask yourself, okay, so what is considered moderate to vigorous exercise? Well, moderate exercise is exercise that when you're doing it, you could have a conversation. You may not want to have that conversation, but if you had to have a small conversation, you could do it. May not feel the best, but that's a good feeling. And there are heart rate zones associated with both of these for moderate and vigorous, but I think it's useful to focus on how you feel while you're doing them, because it's not always relevant or easy to look at a heart rate monitor, and everyone's heart rate could be a little bit different in these zones. So I think focusing on moderate is something that you could have a conversation, although you may not really want to. And then that vigorous, for a feel for that, is something that would be really challenging and that you wouldn't really be able to have a conversation if you wanted. Certainly wouldn't feel like it. And if you go to have one, it would be very, very short and would not last long. These are also associated with various time frames. A moderate aerobic exercise session might look like 20, 30, 40 minutes. You can sustain that for a little bit longer, whereas a vigorous aerobic exercise routine might last, 15, 20 minutes, 10 minutes or less, depending on how vigorous it is. And the exercise recommendation requirements change with that. So we've probably heard of the 150 minutes of exercise at moderate intensity. That's that first one. And then if you do vigorous intensity exercise, they actually bump that down by half, down to 75 minutes. It all matters, but those are some general guidelines. So then nutrition and a healthy mind. How do the things that we eat and intake affect our mind? So the brain and energy requirements. So your brain requires a ton of fuel, and it requires 20% of all the body's energy use. That is more than any other major organ of the body by far. And we know this, the brain is super important. It's involved in everything we do and all of our tasks that we do. Very important organ. And the brain requires glucose to function, and this comes from the food we eat. So the brain exclusively runs on glucose, and we get that from food. And the brain utilizes insulin, just like the rest of the body, to utilize glucose. And an interesting fact, or takeaway, is that there's some new research out there about this thing called type 3 diabetes. And you've probably heard of type 1 diabetes, which is autoimmune based, type 2, which being more adult onset, characterized by insulin resistance. And type 3 would be specifically around insulin resistance of the brain. And they may think that this is something that you find with people who have problems like Alzheimer's disease, which is an all too common occurrence in today's world and a really heartbreaking disease. So this research might be useful in the future if this is something that could be changed. And regardless of what all that works out to, we know that managing our glucose intake is critical for our health. So talking about that a little bit more, we know that diets high in refined sugars and processed foods can be harmful to the brain. It contributes to poor insulin regulation, which we just talked about. It also contributes to inflammation. So inflammation is kind of that root cause to most diseases that we see today. Have you ever had anything that is an itis, like arthritis, that is inflammation of the joint or inflammation of whatever it is that you're talking about? So the foods that we intake can affect that. And then there's also oxidative stress of free radicals. Then there's antioxidant defenses against those. So diets high in these things might cause oxidative stress, and oxidative stress is that imbalance in free radicals and its antioxidant defenses. So what can help with that? So good sources of antioxidant defenses come from nutrient-dense food. This is kind of all the rage now. It's things that are in supplements, but they're really, really good nutrient-dense foods that you can take in. An example of those are berries. Everyone typically loves berries. You have kale, which might have lost about half of you on kale. But kale can be very good and is a good source of antioxidants. If you've ever tried it roasted with light extra virgin olive oil and some sea salt, it can be very good. And then pecans, which is a fantastic source and a good nut to have. And then there are foods also that affect the gastrointestinal tract. Why do I bring up the stomach or the GI tract when it comes to talking about nutrition and healthy mind? Well, it's because some people consider the gut as the second brain, and this is the key producer of about 95% of the serotonin in the body. That's that important mood regulating neurotransmitter. And this could be a huge part of how you feel. And we all know that things that affect the gut can definitely affect how we feel, and it could even affect our brains. So how do we support that? Well, one of the main things that serotonin needs to be produced is an amino acid called tryptophan. So in order to get more tryptophan, you could eat more healthy lean proteins like salmon, poultry, and eggs. So here are the keys to a healthy mind. We have these two circles and just some examples of some of the stuff we talked about. We talked about how nutrition through glucose regulation, incorporating more antioxidants, helping our guts produce serotonin can all help with a healthy mind. We also talked about exercise and how it improves our sleep and how that affects everything. If you've ever gone without sleep for a long time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They find that people who are chronically sleep deprived can even act like those who are intoxicated. So it's a big deal and affects everything that goes on with our health and our minds. And then there's BDNF and other things like endorphins that are produced through exercise. So both of those circles contribute to our healthy mind. And you might be asking yourself, okay, so what do I do with this information? What do I do now that I know some of the things and how it works to help improve a healthy mind? And I think that's a fantastic question. And the fact that you're asking that question is awesome. everyone is different. My background is different than yours. What is affecting me right now is probably different than what affects you. So I think it's very useful to look at those things and pick one, maybe from just one category or both, of something that you could work on. Maybe it's something like incorporating more berries, which we know are very, very enjoyable, most people like. You could stretch yourself and maybe do the kale. You could also work on glucose regulation if you wanted to do that and make that your thing. I'm going to control how much sugar I'm going to have. I'm going to work on eating more complex carbohydrates versus simple carbohydrates, which would be like white rice to brown rice, white potato to sweet potato, white pasta to whole grain pasta, whatever you tolerate and works for you, or it might be supporting your gut. And then there's exercise. Okay, well, if you're not exercising, well, maybe this is a good opportunity to get encouragement to start. Maybe you want to do whatever kind of exercise feels good for you, or just utilize those walks that Hippocrates talked about. You might also be someone who is exercising. You want to release more of this BDNF and those feel-good hormones like that runner's high. So you might try doing more moderate to a vigorous aerobic exercise. So that might be the step that you take. Whatever makes sense for you, I would encourage you to pick just those one or two things to work on that may help you with your healthy mind. And then pay attention to how you feel. If you notice things you're eating or the way you're exercising changes how you feel, pay attention to that and make an adjustment. So just to review a couple things, we talked about the mental health, what the definition of that is, what it says and what it doesn't say. We talked about the power of exercise and how it helps the brain by increasing levels of endorphins, improving sleep, providing healthy distraction, stress reduction, and so on. We talked about BDNF, that's the new one, associated with how we learn and feel and maybe even help with chronic stress. We talked about how the brain utilizes food, glucose specifically, how antioxidants work. We talked about how diets high in refined sugars and processed foods affect us and things we can do for that. Those are a few things we talked about. Hopefully that information is useful for you and you can make that change that you want to make. Thank you so much for listening to this material. We'd be happy to take your questions. If you have any questions, please contact me at andrew.baker@blessinghealth.org, or you can call me at 7998. I'd be happy to answer those. You're probably wondering at this point, how do you get those points for attending today's Lunch and Learn? And you're going to go to the Microsoft Forms link, which is on the right-hand side of the screen on the manageable activity for this Lunch and Learn. And that code word you use is pool season. The fantastic time of year is officially pool season. It's after Memorial Day. Hopefully that works out for us all to be able to utilize that or enjoy the summer weather. So we're going to use that code word pool season. Thank you so much for attending today's Lunch and Learn, and have a great day.